Today is January 16th, 2023. My name's Tim, the BTWN guy. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. This video you're watching is Justin Peters' comments on John MacArthur. As we continue to pray for Pastor John's recovery and return to the pulpit, I thought you would enjoy this video. Justin Peters talking about John MacArthur. Now, it has two parts to it. The first part of what Justin is going to say has to do with John MacArthur's accomplishments via the work of God, how God has used John MacArthur. Now, the second half of Justin's comments are going to be addressing John MacArthur's character and first-eye witness accounts of John MacArthur, and then some other stories as well. You will enjoy this video if you appreciate Pastor John MacArthur, so stay tuned. Of course, we want you to subscribe to Justin Peters' YouTube channel. Link to it in the description of this video. And if you want to watch the full video, you can go to Justin Peters' YouTube channel and sort by videos and then by popular, and you will see John MacArthur's, Justin Peters' interview with John MacArthur right there. So in that video, Justin takes some time to address his thoughts, to share his thoughts about John MacArthur. And I have cut them out of the video and want to share them with you here.
So John has been the pastor of Grace Community Church now for 53 years. And there are very few men who can say that they've pastored the same church for 53 years. But John can. And over the course of those 53 years, he's had to fight a number of different theological battles. There's been the inerrancy battle, the lordship salvation battle, the seeker-sensitive battle, the charismatic battle, the social justice battle, and most recently, the battles with the local, state, and federal government related to the restrictions that they have attempted to place upon churches and how they can gather for corporate worship in light of COVID-19 and all of that. And so each of these battles, I guess maybe with the exception of the COVID-19 stuff, but each of these battles are ongoing. You know, they continue to be fought to one degree or another, and they're all interrelated, by the way. They're not standalone. They're all very much interrelated. And as John has had to fight these different battles over the decades, the number of men who have been willing to stand with him in these battles, that number has shrunk. That number has become fewer and fewer and fewer, to the point now where I think, now listen carefully to how I say this, given the size of John MacArthur's church, Grace Community Church, he pretty much stands alone. He stands alone. Now, there are thousands of other pastors out there all around the world, and I know this because by God's grace I've been able to preach all around the world in many of these churches. There are thousands of pastors who are just as faithful as is John MacArthur, and he and I both have a tremendous amount of love and respect and appreciation for these faithful shepherds that are out there. But they don't have the size of the platform that he does. And given the size of his platform, given the size of Grace Community Church, I'm not aware of another pastor who has a church that size who has been willing to take the stands that John MacArthur has taken and continues to take. Generally speaking, the larger an evangelical church becomes, the less willing it is to take the hard stands on biblical truth. Generally speaking, that is true. Now, to be sure, there are plenty of small churches out there that are wackadoodle. It doesn't mean that just because a church is small means it's faithful, not at all. But the larger a church becomes, the less willing it is to take those hard stands, because the greater the pressure. The bigger platform you have, the bigger target you become. And so to stand fast in the face of withering criticism, that takes a man who is completely devoted to God. That takes a man who actually believes that one day he will stand before Christ and give an account. John MacArthur knows that one day when he dies, he's not going to stand before a committee. He's not going to have to give an account to a committee. He's not going to have to give an account to a denomination. He's not going to have to give an account to a blog writer or whatever. He's going to stand before Christ and give an account, and he knows that. And you can tell he knows that. You can tell he believes it just by the way that he has conducted his ministry, has taught the Word of God faithfully, and lived his life. And so I'm very, very grateful, as are so many people. John MacArthur's ministry has had an impact on both me and my wife Kathy in ways that neither one of us could adequately put into words. And so many of you watching this right now, you're saying, "Yep, me too." And so I'm very, very grateful. And I think the argument can be made. I've said this before, and some people don't like it, but I'll say it again because I believe it. I think the argument could be made that given the sheer size, the sheer scope of John MacArthur's ministry and all that goes along with it, that God has used him in a greater way than any other single individual since the apostolic era. And lest you think I'm overstating that, stop and think about the scope of his ministry, because in God's providence, John MacArthur lives in this day and age in which we have the ability to disseminate teaching so quickly at the click of a button. You know, teaching can go out all around the world. When you consider just the sky, you know, John MacArthur is not living in the 16, 17, 18, or even 1900s. He's living in the 21st century. But when you think of all that, you think that every sermon that he has ever preached is available for a free download. A couple of clicks of a mouse, and you're there. He's preached through the entire New Testament, verse by verse. He's preached, I don't know how many sermons in the Old Testament. I don't think it's even possible to preach through the entire Old Testament verse by verse. You'd have to live to be about 500 years old. But many sermons in the Old Testament, they're all available to listen to watch, to read the transcripts, and it's all available for free. I mean, unless you live in a country like North Korea where it's just prohibited, anybody on the planet can have access to that for free. You look at the commentary. He's written an entire commentary set on the New Testament, systematic theology, Bible doctrine. When you look at the ministry of Grace to You, gty.org, when you look at the Master Seminary and all of the, who knows how many men, thousands of men that they have trained to be expositors of Scripture, to be pastors, how to shepherd a church. And these men have gone out all over the world. The Masters Academy International. I think God has used John MacArthur in a greater way to champion all of these things, to champion expository preaching, to champion biblical churches, sound theology, sound doctrine, to recover the doctrine and the practice of church discipline. And I'll ask him about that in the interview. That was unheard of until John MacArthur came along. So just the sheer scope of this, I think God has used, in his providence, has chosen to use John MacArthur in a greater way than any other single individual in the apostolic era. So I'm very, very grateful for him. And as you can imagine, with such a sizable platform and the scope of his ministry, he's a big target. The bigger ministry you have, the bigger target you become. And he's got a lot of critics. But here's an interesting observation, a couple of them, that I've noticed, because I see it in my own ministry as well, even though on a smaller scale, because my ministry is not near the size of his. But I still see the same thing. The angriest, loudest critics are either people who come from theological circles that are opposed to what you believe. So, for example, John MacArthur's critics, some of his loudest critics come from Arminians, come from egalitarians. In other words, people who believe that a woman can preach and teach and pastor just like a man can do. come from charismatics, come from, theological circles that are opposed to the things he believes. So it's quite natural to expect that your critics would come from those circles. I'm not surprised when I get criticism from Word of Faith folks, for example. So that's part of them. But there's another part, and I would say the angriest people, the loudest people, the nastiest people, the people who, quite honestly, the least truthful people, the people who will take half-truths and twist them, the people who have a clear agenda and just have a hatred for, John MacArthur or whoever, in my cases as well. Those kind of folks, the angriest folks, they come from no church accountability. They have no church that they are a part of. They have no church accountability. And it's very ironic that people who would criticize you for how you do church or how you teach or the things you believe would come from folks who have no church background themselves, who have no, or not maybe a background, but have no church accountability themselves. So I think that's very ironic, and it's true with John MacArthur, and it's true with my ministry as well. I do not know John MacArthur as well as do many. I've been around him some. I do consider him a friend. He, by God's grace, considers me one of his friends, but I don't know him all that well personally. I have not. There are many, many others who know John MacArthur far better than do I. But I do know a lot of people very, very well who know John very, very well, if that makes sense. And something that I've noticed about everybody that I know who knows him very well, they all say the same thing about him. They all say he is one of the kindest, most generous, and humble people they've ever met. I hear those same three things from everybody that knows him well. He is kind, he is humble, and he is generous. And those three things keep coming up over and over and over with people who know John well. And that speaks very, very well of him. He helps an awful lot of people that, he doesn't tell anyone about. He just does it. But you know how word kind of gets around, and people have taken note of that, how generous he is with people, how kind, how humble he is. I've seen that myself on a couple of occasions. I've had an opportunity to see that myself. Long story short, I'll tell you this, but it was just kind of a really neat, very unscripted kind of a insight that I had into John MacArthur's character. A few years ago, I was teaching Sunday school for Phil Johnson at the Grace Life pulpit there at Grace Community Church. And I guess John heard that I was in town at the church on that Sunday, and so he invited me and my wife Kathy to come down and sit on the front pew there for the morning worship service, of course, after Sunday school. And so we did that, but Kathy and I weren't alone. We had a friend with us, a friend of ours named Frankie, a lady named Frankie, and she was there. She had invited her niece to come, and her niece, I'll change her name just to protect her privacy, but anyway, let's call her Susan. So Susan was there. Susan, Frankie's niece, was just 19 years old back in, I think this was 2018, so she was 19 years old. Frankie is a Christian. Susan was not. And so Susan had no idea where she was. She just came to church because her Aunt Frankie invited her to. So Susan had, Grace Community Church meant nothing to her. The name John MacArthur meant nothing to her. She had no idea. It was just another church, as far as she was concerned, but an unconverted young lady. And so, but anyway, she came and sat down on the front pew with us. And as we were placed in the pew, so I'm sitting here, Kathy is to my left, then Frankie to her left, and then Susan to her left. And Susan was the last person there on the pew, or the first person, depending on how you come in. So anyway, we got there before John did. And after we had been sitting there for a few minutes, John walks in into the sanctuary, and he comes to the pew where we are. The first person to whom he comes is Susan. And John extends his hand to her to welcome her, and he says, "Good morning, what's your name?" And she said, "Susan, what's your name?" "Hi, Susan, I'm John." we're so glad to have you here with us this morning. Not a hint of surprise, not a hint of, did you seriously just ask me my name? I'm John MacArthur. Think about this. The front pew, Grace Community Church, Sunday morning worship, John MacArthur comes in. I dare say that might be, I think it'd probably be a safe bet that that's probably the only time that John MacArthur has ever been asked or said to, "What's your name?" By someone sitting on the front pew in a Sunday morning at Grace Community Church. Not a hint of surprise. He was just as kind and gracious to her and welcomed her so warmly. And, I saw that and I thought, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That was a neat little window, little insight into his character. Just last weekend, I was preaching at Redeemer Bible Church in La Quinta, California, right outside of Palm Springs. Good church, by the way, if you live in that neck of the woods and looking for a good church, Redeemer Bible Church. But it's pastored by a man named Sam Matthews. And Sam is a great, great guy. We just had a wonderful few days together. Good brother in the Lord, good, faithful expositor of Scripture. And but Sam is a graduate of the Master's Seminary. And Sam was a student at the Master's Seminary from 2002 to 2012. He earned 3 degrees there, Master of Divinity, Master of Theology, and then a doctorate of ministry. So he was there for quite a while. And Sam was just telling me a little bit about being a seminary student. The first thing that Sam told me about being a student at TMS, again, remember, he started in 2002, 20 years ago. He said the first thing that he was taught by John MacArthur and the other professors there was not theology, was not exegesis, was not hermeneutics, was not church history or any of those things. He was taught those things, to be sure. The first thing he was taught was to love his wife. To love his wife. He said, that is the first thing that I was taught by John MacArthur and the other professors there, and me and the other students that were there with him. Men, love your wives. That was the first thing they were taught. And when I heard that, I thought, that's pretty cool. That's good stuff. That speaks to his character and integrity. And, as a minister, as a preacher, our first ministries, if you're watching this and you're a preacher, your first ministry is not to the church, it's to your wife. As a preacher, my first ministry is not to the people to whom I preach and teach. My first ministry is to Kathy. And I thought that was really cool that they were taught that there at TMS. So, dear ones, I'm very grateful for John MacArthur. And I know a lot of people have said of me, oh, Justin idolizes John MacArthur. He worships John MacArthur and all that kind of stuff. And that's nonsense. I don't idolize any man. I don't worship any man. John MacArthur would be the first person to tell you not to do that. But there is a place for being grateful, for being appreciative to a man who has proven himself to be faithful for so many years, untouched by the kind of moral scandals that bring so many other men in the pulpit down. Untouched by anything like that. He's proven himself to be faithful. He has withstood oftentimes withering criticism, lies, falsehoods that others have told about him, and he just stands strong. And I've heard Phil Johnson say of John MacArthur, I haven't heard John MacArthur say this personally, but Phil Johnson has heard him say it in regard to his critics. And John MacArthur says, I wouldn't defend myself to Satan. And we all know who the accuser of the brethren is. And so John MacArthur doesn't answer them because, well, for one thing, he knows that no matter what he says, they wouldn't be satisfied. They would just keep on. So there's no satisfying them. He knows that he has got one person to whom he must give an account one day, or actually, to be theologically precise, 3 persons, one God and 3 persons to whom he will one day give an account and whom he must please. He has an audience of 1. So very grateful for John MacArthur. And thank you for indulging me for these few minutes here. Without any further delay, here's the interview with John MacArthur.
So awesome, very well articulated thoughts by Justin Peters about John MacArthur. How long have you been listening to Pastor John MacArthur? I was contemplating how long I've been listening to him. I have been listening to him. Well, when didn't he used to style his hair differently before he started brushing it straight back. He used to kind of comb it over. When did he change his hairstyle? Because I never listened to him when he had the comb over. I was in different theological circles. As far as I've ever listened to him, he's had that awesome straight back haircut. And your comments are appreciated below. Maybe you remember when he changed his hairstyle. So this is the video, my interview with John MacArthur. It's on Justin Peters' YouTube channel. What I just played for you was the introduction for this interview. I mean, I think it would be cool to sit down with Pastor John and interview him as Justin Peters did. So Justin Peters had that privilege, and he put it on his YouTube channel. Surprisingly, it only has 180,000 views. Again, go subscribe to Justin Peters' YouTube channel, watch the video, link in the description, and link to support Justin Peters in the description of this video. All his links, all his contacts, his website and everything, find those in the description of this video. Let's see. Yep, there's his YouTube channel again. And there's our thumbnail. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you haven't subscribed to this YouTube channel, please do. And please continue to pray. I have no update on how Pastor John is doing as far as I know. What was said by the church elders on, I believe, January 13th is the latest update that we have. Pastor John is resting. He's doing well, and we are praying for a full recovery. He will be out of the pulpit until the Shepherds Conference, which is in March. So we will have the pleasure of hearing some other elders preaching Sunday mornings at Grace Community Church. Until next video, my prayer is that God would bless each and every one of you. I look forward to reading your comments below, and that's it. God's blessings be with you. Take care.